This is Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde.
And we're back for another episode of Agent Provocateur. Adam, I haven't seen you since Toronto a few weeks ago, and I missed you. I'm happy to be back, and let's get her going.
I missed you too, Allan. I'm ready. I mean, this is the most wonderful time of the year. Nobody's lost a game yet. It's fantastic. Everybody's happy. We can all win the Stanley Cup right now.
Everybody's going to win the Stanley Cup. Just talk to all 32 GMs in the NHL, and they will tell you.
Right, and every player is in the best shape of their lives, and it's going to be great. So what I do want to actually give you a little bit of credit for is that, earlier on the show, and I can't even remember which episode, you talked about which two markets where was the NHL going to go? If they're going to expand, where they're going to go to which two markets? Allan, you said what?
Well, I said that I was hearing it was going to Houston and Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And I am hearing further that the NHL is very soon, in the very near future, going to open up the formal expansion process. And it appears that it's going to Houston and Atlanta.
And the ownership group's obviously there. The NHL's had plenty of time to vet them, go through the proposal process, that sort of thing. By the way, big shout out because that's what Allan heard. Insider Allan Walsh. But if
this agent thing doesn't work out, I could always
you and CJ team up. It'd be great. Yeah. I want to know though, what's the turnaround time? Okay, so they go to the Board of Governors, they vote this in. How long does it normally take for a team to get approved and then hit the ice?
Probably still around 4 years away.
Okay.
For sure, the NHL is going to want to get a new CBA in place before beginning the expansion process of putting teams, awarding franchises, and putting teams on the ice.
Okay. And arenas need to be built or retrofitted, that sort of thing. Do you have a sense of either ownership group? Do you know anything about them yet? And if so, why do you think the NHL likes their pitch and believes in what the plan is?
Well, Houston is a legendary hockey market. They had a great franchise in the WHA with Gordie Howe and his sons leading that team, the Houston Aeros. Mm-hmm. They won for I think a few years in a row. What was it called? The Avco Cup.
Avco Cup,
which was the WHA championship trophy. Before that, many moons ago, and I don't know if anybody actually remembers this, Houston was a farm team of the Montreal Canadiens back in the old Central Hockey League. Wow. And a lot of the Canadiens prospects started off playing for a team called the Houston Apollos.
So this is it's a storied market for that. And then hockey sort of went away. Once the WHA merged with the NHL, Houston was not one of the teams that the NHL took on. And, they saw it happen in football as well with the Houston Oilers moving on. But it is if I'm not mistaken, I think it's market 5 or market 6 in terms of population and media. It's huge. It's a big city. Why do you think it's taken this long to get hockey back in Houston?
Well, I think you need the right ownership. And I think the NHL has learned that lesson after, 20-year saga in Arizona. Mm-hmm. And the leader of the ownership group, Fertitta, in Houston, who owns the Rockets, and I believe he also owns the building, is a multi-billionaire, very deep pockets, and clearly the kind of owner that Gary Bettman and the other owners would like to admit to the exclusive country club.
And in Atlanta, this will be the third go-around. Now, I have my reasons why I believe Atlanta is going to work and why it didn't the first two times. Because I think there are some obvious reasons why Atlanta didn't work the first two times. But for anybody that doesn't know and doesn't have the insight on this stuff to the level that you might, Allan, Why is Atlanta going to work this time, or why does the NHL believe it?
Once again, it comes down to ownership. There's a great profile on the leader of the group in Atlanta in the most current edition of the Hockey News. Pretty interesting interview with him. They have very deep pockets. They have a great plan. They're going to build a tremendous district around the arena where there'll be bars, restaurants, hotels, office space. And it's the kind of project, when you look at it, when people have looked at it, that has absolutely blown people away. And I think the NHL is very hot for this deal and to go back there.
And did you have any players that played for the Thrashers back when they were a team?
I have.
What was their experience of living in Atlanta? Did they like it?
They liked it. I had a few players on the team. One player called me up one day and said, "Well, this was a pretty interesting day. It was a sort of mandatory team go to local hospital and do some goodwill and go in and meet with sick kids and make them feel good and visit with them and sign autographs and take pictures." And he says, I knocked on 4 or 5 doors with a nurse of different kids who were in the hospital and went in and introduced myself. And all of the kids I talked to had no idea who I was and no idea that we even had a hockey team in Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
He said so. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah. No, but
Yeah.
it wasn't a, I was quite a bit younger when Atlanta left for Winnipeg, but they had, from what I understand, Atlanta left for Winnipeg.
Atlanta left for Calgary and then Atlanta left. So yeah, you're technically correct.
Yes. Sorry. When Atlanta left for Calgary, my parents hadn't even met yet. I'm not even sure if they did graduated yet. So, but I have to say the Thrashers thing, there was a lot of stuff about that just did not go well. That team seems to be in the same way that the Coyotes had the issue in Arizona, was not well promoted. And frankly, the on-ice product was never that good. So you couldn't bring people in based on a winning franchise. There's tough competition in Atlanta for sports. There's the Hawks, there's the Falcons, there's obviously the Braves. How do you think a team like that, makes inroads this time?
The Atlanta Thrashers came into the NHL with a lot of dysfunction in ownership almost from the get-go. They had 5 or 6 different ownership groups, and they were all at war with each other. And the entire time the Thrashers were playing in the NHL, what was going on behind the scenes in the boardroom ruled over anything else and ultimately led to their demise and sale and relocation to Winnipeg. Mm-hmm. So that's really what it was all about. If that team had stable ownership, there's no doubt in my mind they'd probably still be in the NHL today.
What do you say to the people that will tell you, hey, there's a dilution of talent? There just is not enough talent in the world to support 2 or 4 more NHL teams in the next 10 years. What do you say to that?
I think the NHL could support 40 teams if they wanted to go that route. The talent is there. The fact that hockey is being played at such a high level in so many different countries right now, and continuing to, if you look at the numbers, more and more kids are playing minor hockey. And you look at Switzerland and Germany and Denmark and Norway and Slovakia and Czech Republic and Sweden, Finland. The players are there. Yeah. And I don't believe the NHL going to 34, and I don't think they're there's any plan in the next 10 years to go beyond 34. If you can support 32, you can support 34.
And what do you think about the playoff format? Do you, and again, I'm throwing a lot of this at you because we don't know the answer to those, but do you think there's like a play-in thing like they do in the NBA? Little play-in tournament?
I would love for there to be a play-in of some sorts. Maybe at 34 teams, the NHL looks at it again. It's way down the line, and I don't think that any of those issues have been seriously looked at yet. Mm-hmm. But certainly that is something that will be on the table one day.
Now, it is training camp, Allan. We're going to move past expansion, and we're going to move to the now. I'm actually surprised. I got a text from Allan. I forget whether it was yesterday or the day before. This week's been like drinking out of a fire hose. But you saying, let's do a show this week. And I was like backing off, like, no, I think it's training camp week. Things are kind of getting crazy. So what are the first few days of training camp like for you, the agent?
Well, it's an exciting time. When hockey is in hiatus, I miss it. And there is a certain routine that I live my life by once the season is underway. And it's like getting back into my 9 to 10 month routine as opposed to the off season. When players are on the ice, windows when they're available, certain times a day you're more likely to communicate with general managers, assistant general managers than other days. But there's training camp to me brings an air of optimism, hope, excitement, enthusiasm. So it's really something that as the calendar days in September tick off to the beginning of camp, it's something that I really look forward to. And I think that while training camp for many players can be a bit of a grind in the first couple of days, getting up to speed with the pace, there's always guys with, training camp soreness. The first 3-4 days of camp, there is, even amongst all of that, a lot of excitement for everybody to get back with the guys, to get back in the room, to get back on the ice and get her going.
And, yesterday, so in Toronto, I think, and a lot of other markets yesterday, it was media day. And then today is like first practice day. And, every client and every player on every team has a different situation going into training camp. And a lot of them can be comfortable in front of the camera. A lot of them not. What do you talk to or coach or discuss with your guys beforehand? Hey, if they ask you about your contract or what are you going to say? Or how do you think, is there any way to plan and prep for media day?
Sometimes there's certain players, whether they're entering into the last year of a contract or there could be another issue in their market that's sort of swirling, where you can anticipate what the questions are going to be. And sometimes I'll reach out to a player and say, hey, when you speak to the media, these are the likely questions. Let's talk about what you're going to say. Sometimes players will reach out to me and say, I'm expecting to get a question regarding this or this, and, what do you think? And it's just part of the daily interaction you have with your clients. There's no programming that goes on where you fill a player up with talking points, so to speak. I think that generally players are very savvy when it comes to, and relaxed and comfortable when it comes to talking to the media. There's a few exceptions, but most of them are. I think that sometimes you can have a conversation with a player I will then watch a clip of the media availability and be like, wow, that was just like what we talked about, a day or two ago or this morning, and kind of chuckle to myself. But, it's just all part of the getting back at it is working with the media, especially in those markets, like the Canadian markets, where there's a lot more media to deal with than in some other places.
What's if a player goes into camp and let's say they might be a young player trying to earn a spot, or they're an older player, or somebody coming off an injury and they become a bubble player. I specifically think about younger players in this, like they're trying to push for that spot on the team. What difference can an agent make in helping them gain that spot? Because obviously, in theory, it all comes down to how they play on the ice, but I would imagine agents play some sort of role. What would you say to that?
I just had a conversation with somebody, it's 2 days now ago, where he is coming into camp and legitimately competing for an NHL roster spot. And I said to him, don't make the mistake that so many other players have made in the past and wait a week before you get going. Don't be in awe of anybody. These players are your teammates, but you are also competing for a spot, and it is your job to go out there from the first time your blades hit the ice and grab a job, right? So don't wait. Don't be a deer in the headlights. Don't wait for anybody to talk to you, because there's going to be a lot less communication at the NHL level than you may be familiar with in junior or in college or in the minors. Go out there from the first time your skates hit the ice and go get that job. It's on you to go get it. Don't wait for anybody to give you anything.
I love that. Fired up for that. So this is the part of the year, I think, where fans, we sort of get back into it. Is there anything that, is there I hate to put it this way, Allan, you're on social media. Is there
really?
Yeah. I've seen a couple tweets.
You've noticed.
Fans get back engaged too, right? From the hardcore fans, we are all watching. I mean, obviously I am. You're watching everything. You're grabbing every clip. You're hanging on every sentence that these guys say. And, some of them have open social media profiles and hopefully not open DMs, but sometimes that happens. Is there a protocol or a way to deal with the uptick in social media traffic as well? Because they're going to be hearing from strangers.
They are, and it's something that you need to prepare players for. There's more players now who are shunning social media than ever before. And mainly because, it's just my opinion. It's become such a cesspool, of hate, and it can be very damaging to players' psyche and morale to be sitting there and scrolling through messages of what fans are saying about them. And I think players, not just listening to me or other people, are on their own saying, you know what, I don't want to be on here to read this stuff. Other players are able to compartmentalize or discipline themselves to maybe go on to read daily updates or news without looking at their mentions. So they're able to very much use it for, like in the old days, like you would be reading a sports section in a newspaper, right? Many people don't do that anymore. They use social media for that purpose, but be able to resist the urge to go in and say, I wonder what people are saying about me right now.
Right.
And there's some people who can do that and do that very well. And there's other people who can read their mentions and read all the hate coming at them and laugh about it. And it doesn't impact them one bit, but everybody's different. Yeah. And it is very easy for anybody to go on there and have your soul crushed if you really care. And if you allow that kind of stuff to impact you, So I try to get a sense in talking to the players, what bucket they would fall into with regard to how social media would impact them. And I've never hesitated to say, you know what, get off it, delete your account, just get off it. Don't go on it. You don't need it. And there's many guys where I will become their news source, and I'm constantly sending them updates, whether it's updates about their team, updates about the sport, or maybe something else that I know they have a lot of big interest in, and send them stuff that they can read and be updated on and be up to date on, as opposed to having a much wider net capturing a lot of things maybe they don't really need to read or want to read.
Right. Yeah, because it can throw you off. I'll tell you, it took for Steve and I on the Steve Dangle podcast, it took us years to train ourselves not to look. Whereas Jesse, it's never bothered him. To surprise, nothing really shakes him that way. And it is funny, the personalities, how reactive you are, how much you care about what other people think, or you didn't even realize that you cared what other people thought. And you're like, you know what? I gotta step away from this. Now, one of the major
every once in a while, I'll have a voicemail sitting in my inbox at the office with some guy who just goes off on me. You're the biggest idiot in hockey. You're a cancer of the sport, and goes on and on and on. And I laugh my ass off and delete the message.
Is it the same guy, or?
So one guy has left several messages over the years.
Well, I wonder if he's from head office or not. So Allan, yesterday we had the huge news that the Toronto Maple Leafs have not a new owner, but a majority owner in a big way in Rogers Communications, spending $4.7 billion to buy out the remaining 37.5% that Bell BCE, which is another cable and internet giant here in Canada, owned. Rogers has been a far more active ownership in sport. I think they sponsor 5 or 6 different arena names. They obviously own the Blue Jays. They obviously owned all of the Maple Leaf sports and entertainment portfolio. 4.7
Canadian broadcast rights
and Canadian broadcast rights as well, of course, for 2 more years. And then there's a big competition coming. But I'm looking at this and I'm like $4.7 billion for 37.5%, which roughly, according to Sportico, puts the entire MLSE portfolio at worth something like $9.3 billion. Considering that Bell and Rogers bought in about 10 years ago and the teams were worth $1.3 billion, $1.4 billion, pretty good investment on their part. What do you think the ramifications of this are going to be from a fan's perspective? And I have to ask, do we have the NHL's first $3 billion franchise? I'm talking about in U.S. dollars here. The New York Rangers and Toronto Maple Leafs are always near the top of franchise value, but it's always 2.2, 2.3. Are the Toronto Maple Leafs officially worth $3 billion, do you think?
100%. They're probably worth right now north of $3 billion. I remember when the NBA forced Donald Sterling to sell the Clippers, many people thought the team was worth less than $1 billion, and they were sold for $2 billion. And people couldn't believe the number at the time, right? But it's mostly people from the outside, some media, many fans. The actual value of NHL teams is far beyond what has been reported and what sports media estimate that value to be. And the greatest circumstantial evidence to support that is look at the price paid in this sale. Look at the valuations that are being placed on franchises for selling of minority shares. Look at the value being placed on NBA franchises as they allow private equity to come in and take minority positions. There are only so many franchises to go around.
Right.
The proportion of billionaires has skyrocketed across the world, but particularly in North America. And people want in. And owning a professional sports franchise is a money-making operation. You can pass on paper losses to your individual and take tax losses year after year after year. The value of your franchise goes up. Mm-hmm. Relatively speaking, money is cheap to finance. And if you're financing at 7, 8, 9% a year and your franchise doubles in 7 or 8 years, that's basically a license to sit in your basement and just print money. And that's what these teams are doing. So when I hear people, especially people with teams, complaining about the rise in player salaries, the franchise values have exploded over the last 10, 15 years, and player salaries have in no way kept up with the rise of franchise values. And it is an important metric to look at. People go, oh, no, you got to look at the revenue. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's a metric, right? But if you're buying into a team for $1 billion and you're going to sell it for $2 billion, right? And the highest paid players in the NHL today are making just a tiny little bit more than they were making in the year 2000.
Yeah.
That's something to look at.
Yeah, no kidding. It's and the franchise tags not going to the players, only the owners, like all of that. What do you think this means for the NHL at the executive level in terms of, I mean, listen, the Toronto Maple Leafs have at least from the outside been more of a passive team at the executive level. And what I mean by that is you look at the ownerships like the Chicago ownership and Boston's ownership, and they've been very, very involved. I mean, the Wirtz family they almost ran the league for 70 years, right? Like they were essentially the family behind everything. Do you see the Toronto Maple Leafs becoming perhaps more involved at the executive level in making decisions along with Gary Bettman and some of these teams? Because Ed Rogers, from all accounts, is a pretty impassioned person once he makes up his mind.
I definitely think Toronto will have a bigger seat at the table and certainly have a louder voice when it comes to ownership involvement in league decisions. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt in my mind that Toronto's voice will have certainly more value at the table based on Ed Rogers' involvement now and being the majority owner. I do see that. But getting back to what we talked about to kick off the beginning of the show, mm-hmm. I expect expansion fees for, let's say, I'm right, and it is Houston and Atlanta, to be $1.5 billion, right? Just a few years ago, Vegas came into the league with a $500 million expansion fee. Mm-hmm. Seattle was $650, and we are going to be, when those two teams hit the ice, $1.5 billion for expansion for two promising yet unproven markets.
Right.
And the expansion fee is going to impact the value of all NHL teams.
Right. Right.
Right. And that's something to really keep in mind.
And with the Rangers and Leafs specifically, along with most of the original 6 teams, you're talking about proven markets, proven to the fact that, it's 110 years almost with the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's been a long, long go. So, Allan, I want to go back to the player side of things here, and camp opened in Boston in a very spicy way, and I want to mention a couple of different things here. The first thing, which is something that drives you nuts, and you tweeted this yesterday in response to a Fluta Shinzawa article for The Athletic, and it says the headline says, quote, "I'm disappointed," and then it says Jeremy Swayman is withholding services. Don Sweeney's reaction is expected. And you said the player is a restricted free agent and does not have a contract. He cannot be withholding services. He has no contractual obligation to provide services to anyone. Why does that drive you so nuts?
Well, they make it sound like, the other term that people like to use is he's holding out.
Yes. Yeah.
Player is not holding out. Holding out references a player who is under contract, and in the rare circumstances where a player under contract has refused to report to camp, that player would be holding out or withholding services. But you cannot hold out of a contract. You cannot withhold services of a contract you don't have.
Right.
You do not have a contract. You have no obligation to provide services to anybody, so you cannot be withholding your services, right? There is no deal. The player cannot really come to training camp without a contract, right? So there are no services to withhold. The player is continuing to negotiate a contract with the club, and, 99.99% of the time, these situations result in a contract at some point in time. It can go all the way until December 1 under the CBA. After December 1, you're not eligible to play in the NHL this year, but there is no withholding of services or holding out.
Okay.
It's the same thing when people would say in previous situations, when the NHL players were locked out, the players are on strike. No, they're not on strike. They're locked out. The doors are locked. There's a sign on the arena window saying players are not allowed to walk in the door, right? They are locked out. They are not on strike.
And what do you say? And I know you've dealt with this in your career, although I can't remember the last one, where you have a restricted free agent and you haven't come to an agreement. Whether they may not have arbitration rights, team might have walked away from arbitration. It could have been a whole bunch of different things that happen. And although I think when teams walk away from arbitration, there's ramifications to that. But Allan, what do you say to a player who, in an RFA case, they're young, they're excited, they want to be there. So, there are probably moments where they go, just fine, I'll take less. I don't want to see my friends go. I have an opportunity to really establish myself here. We'll worry about the contract stuff later. What do you say to players that are RFAs that deserve what they're asking, that haven't got it yet, that have to sit out the first few days of camp?
Sometimes it's longer than the first few days of camp.
Yep.
It is very, very difficult. You're training wherever you're training in the summer. Everybody leaves around 2 weeks before the start of camp. And when your friends that you're training with leave is the first time that it starts to get real. And when camps open and you don't have a deal and you're still sitting at home and you're watching everybody reporting into camp, everything's underway, you still have no deal. It's a very isolating, lonely existence. Think about it. Player, literally since he started playing the game, whether he was 5, 6, 7 years of age, has been at training camp at the beginning of the season with his teammates his entire life. And usually a restricted free agent without a contract who is sitting at home. It is the first time in their entire life. It is September and they are not on the ice every day with their team. So they go skate with a junior team. They go skate with a college team. They go skate with a pro team in Europe, but they're not with their team. And here's what the day is like every day. Girlfriend or a wife, any news? Any updates? Did you talk to your agent? Nothing? Okay. Mom and dad, hey, just checking in. You hear from your agent? Anything going on? Any updates? You walk down the street. People ask you. You can't get away from it. You can't get away from it. Brothers and sisters, even teammates who are on the ice and you're at home. Hey, anything going on? When can we expect you? Any news? You know, it is an isolating, lonely, scary time for a player. He's out of his element. You want to believe, player wants to believe he's standing up for himself. Every other player understands that there is a time for business and it's this player's time in the barrel, and all the other players generally support it. Generally support it because at some point in time, it could or will be themselves or has been themselves in that situation. But it is a very lonely, isolating time.
Yeah. Wow. I don't think I've ever quite heard it put in those like real terms, you know? It's And you know, Allan, I think to move on to the Don Sweeney part, and obviously I'm not speaking specifically about this situation because, you know, I think I'm assuming you saw what Don was talking about when he talked about the, he called the Spit and Chicklets podcast, the Spitting Up on Yourself podcast. And then he said, well, listen, my kid loves them. And, you know, and Biz is a good entertainer and stuff. He gave them that. But he was like, you know, this idea that I didn't call Jeremy Swayman for 3 weeks is completely incorrect. And, you know, we're not going to speculate on that part. You could see, though, that he was really frustrated. You could see that he wants Jeremy Swayman in camp. And I'm sure if Jeremy Swayman were up on a podium, he would say the same thing. They just haven't come to an agreement yet. My question was, when you're in Don Sweeney's position, when you're in an agent's position like yours or you're a player's position, and these rumors are swirling, how frustrating is it when you have major media personalities? And I'm not a major media personality, but I know that we've been guilty of this from time to time, where you hear a rumor or it gets reported and then gets repeated. How frustrating is it to deal with that stuff, especially when they're way off base and might be, as to quote Don, factually incorrect?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to talk about you know, the situation at hand with Don or the player. That's their business, and you expect and you hope that everything gets settled and everybody's happy. And I expect that at some point in time, they will settle their differences and come to an agreement. What I can say is that there are many, many times where I hear a report or I see a report that I know to be Fantasyland. And there have been times in the past where I've called it out and I've said, there is zero truth to any of this. And there are times where I've picked up the phone and called the reporter and I've said, hey, listen, I don't want you to look bad here, but what you're saying has zero truth. And reporters have gone and corrected it very quickly because they don't want to be wrong. And, you know, and sometimes I'll have people reach out and say, you know, this is what I've heard and I'm going to go with the story unless you tell me that I'm wrong. And there is an honor in everybody who deals with everybody. I'm not going to lie. to a journalist because they're going to call me the next day. And you're going to do business with them, hopefully, for the next. This is, by the way, this is my 30th year in the agent business, 30th anniversary. And I think, thank you. And I think to have that longevity in dealing with people for so many years, if you're a liar, you're a liar. If you lie to people, they're not going to deal with you. They're not going to want to deal with. Nobody wants to deal with the liar, right? So I have said to people, I cannot answer that question. I won't answer that question. I'm going to say that over saying something that's blatantly untrue, right? And I think that's clearly the way that it's the way that I handle myself. I think it's the way people should handle themselves in their business. And the ones that are known for not being truthful, either they don't last or nobody listens to them. Right? It's one or the other. Pick your poison. I don't choose to be any one of those people.
Gotcha. Now, I wanted to talk to you about a little wrinkle that Elliot Friedman brought up in his 32 Thoughts blog, which was actually 16 Thoughts this week because it was his wedding anniversary. Now, it has to do with this very odd thing that may happen in the next few years, and we call it cap smoothing. And what it essentially is, and I'm going to read a little bit of what he wrote. NHL Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly said the league and the players have not discussed the idea of, quote, smoothing any potential bump in the cap. The CBA indicates that the cap should be around $92 million next year, which is the final year of the current deal. And assuming that, let's just assume here, Allan, that the deal, there's no lockout and the CBA is worked on and agreed to before the start of the 26-27 season, and we're good to go. But that TV rights in Canada will be agreed to at that point. We're probably going to have a new national TV provider right at that point. If, depending upon if Rogers wants to retain or a company like Amazon, which now owns Monday nights up here, if they come in, there could be a huge infusion of cash from Canada. And obviously, if, TV rights continue to improve, what they saw in the NBA was over one season, a cap jump of $32 million. And that's how the Golden State Warriors were able to get that much talent on one team, right? They took advantage of that. Kevin Durant was available and they got him and they were able to win, and it was crazy. And at the time, the NBA went to the players union and said, guys, do you want to smooth this out? Because this is a big jump. And the union said, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, we want to smooth that out. That's great. Have fun with that. And I feel like I know what side you're going to come down on. But the other argument to this is, well, it's not fair to the guys that signed the long-term deals before they knew any of this was coming. And, there might be 1 year of guys that really get to take advantage of it, and then poof, it's gone. What do you say to that situation, the idea of smoothing the cap?
Well, it all goes back to the CBA that was negotiated during the pandemic. And really there's something in that deal that was lacking. And that was once the escrow debt was completely paid off. It's a very important point. Once the escrow debt was completely paid off, there was no relinking the setting of the midpoint and the upper limit and lower limit to revenue. And I think it's because nobody ever anticipated the escrow debt being paid off as early as it was paid off. It was basically paid off a year ago, and the cap should have gone up last season. Instead of 83.5, it should have gone up more, because now in discussing cap smoothing, we went from 83.5 to 88. And last year, 83.5, there's a 6% escrow cap. It looks very much like the final numbers still have not been calculated, but there could be zero escrow paid, and the entire 6% refunded, reimbursed back to the players from the escrow account when the final accounting is done. This year at 88 million, there is again a 6% escrow cap. So this season, when every player gets a paycheck in the NHL, whether it's signing bonus or salary, base salary, or any other individual bonuses, games played, and so forth, every single paycheck will have 6% deducted from it off the top before any tax treatment. And that 6% goes into an escrow account that is jointly managed by the NHL, NHLPA. Nobody can touch it. It earns a tiny little bit of interest as it sits there, and until there's a accounting final reconciliation at the end of the 24-25 season. Okay, and the expectation is now that based on the formula that exists in the CBA, the cap will go up 5%, which would take it to 92.7 million or thereabouts. Okay. The issue is it doesn't take into account where revenue is going. Okay. So if revenue goes as they're projecting from 6.4 billion ish to around 6.8 or 6.9, or maybe even just coming up to 7 billion, which is possible, you're going to have a situation where not only will the 6% escrow be refunded to the players, but after the reconciliation is done, the league will have received more than 50% of defined revenues, HRR, hockey-related revenue, and the league would have to kick in extra money to equalize it back to 50-50. Okay? But people talk about the salary cap. Everybody knows I hate the salary cap. Here's one of the reasons why I hate the salary cap. And I'm going to give you a very simplified example as to, why I hate it. And again, I don't mean to disrespect anybody, but I'm going to dumb it down as much as I can here.
Please do, for people like me.
Let's say a player has a face value in his contract of $1 million. Mm-hmm. And let's say the upper limit, the cap, has been set higher. Okay. So now we're talking today, 88 million cap. Let's say the cap is at 92, 93 million today instead. And instead of 6% escrow, we go back to the old formula, and maybe 15, 16, 17% escrow is being withheld until the reconciliation. Okay. Mm-hmm. So player face value, $1 million. At the end of the day, 10% of the salary is lost to escrow, and at the end of the day, he's made $900,000. Okay, face value of $1 million, but he's actually after escrow getting $900,000. Mm-hmm. And let's say a player, because the cap is lower, is able to only get in the marketplace $900,000 because you have a lower cap, mm-hmm. and there's less dollars, universal dollars available in the system, and he pays no escrow, right? He pays 6% escrow. It all comes back. He nets out $900,000. You guys are at the same point. The end point comes out to being the same. And players are left thinking, well, I had $1 million, negotiated $1 million in my contract, mm-hmm. and I got $900,000. I lost 10% to I lost $100,000 to escrow. Players hate escrow, Yeah. So the solution to that, and the philosophy of the PA kind of changed rather dramatically during the pandemic to, okay, the players have been railing on for years and years and years that escrow is too high. Mm-hmm. Players have paid in some years anywhere from 17 to 20, as high as 22% escrow, an astronomical figure off the top, okay, of the face value of their contract.
Yeah,
yes,
that's a lot.
Escrow. I mean, outrageous. Who negotiates an employment contract and then loses 20% off the top, right? And it goes back to your employer.
Yeah.
Right. It's not going anywhere else. It ultimately goes back to your employer. But okay, less dollars available in the system, less availability of you to negotiate a higher deal, and you end up at the same place, but you didn't pay any escrow. And you're like, well, I signed for 900 and I kept 900. This is great. You're at the same point. You just got there in a different way.
Right.
So guys are saying, I 6% escrow and I'm getting it all back. It's amazing. We don't pay escrow anymore. Yes, you're not paying escrow anymore. But when you were a free agent or restricted free agent and negotiating your deal, there were less dollars available in the system. If there's an $88 million cap, there's so much money available in the system. If the cap went to $92 million or $93 million this offseason, that money would be spent. Face values of contracts would be higher, and a good portion of that would be paid back to escrow. It gets you to the same point. No one ever talks about that.
I love that. I've never heard that talked about. Do you think, Allan, that the cap will, quote unquote, explode? Or do you think we're going to have incremental $5 and $6 million jumps for the next few years, assuming the CBA's worked out in 2026?
If we go back to the formula that existed before the pandemic, right now we would have a cap somewhere in the mid 90s today, and next year, if we went back to the old formula before the pandemic, the cap would be about, assuming 6.9 billion revenue. I think I did this exercise a couple of weeks ago, back of the envelope kind of math, factoring in all of the expenses that come off the top in calculating the cap, and getting to that number, about 104 million.
That'd be nice.
Yeah,
it'd be nice for the players. It'd be nice for everybody.
Yeah, but escrow would probably get set at 12% to start the year.
Right. And that's why. Okay. That makes sense. Now, we got a couple more things I gotta run you through. First off, Sidney Crosby signed his extension for a few more years to stay in Pittsburgh, despite rampant speculation from yours truly to say, well, maybe he won't. But one of the things that he's been known for his entire career is making $8.7 million. UC Saros, number 74, signed for $7.4 million. Austin Matthews in Toronto has his number 34 in the amount of money he makes per year, or at least did until he signed his extension. And Mitch Marner does too, at least for this year. And then, he's out of contract at the end of the season. Steve Dangle just hates this, except for the Crosby thing, because he feels like, hey, Crosby earned it. It's Crosby. He can do what he wants. What are your thoughts on players? Like, if a player calls you and goes, Allan, whatever it is, I don't care if it's the last $2 before it hits the decimal point, I need my number in the amount of money that I make. What do you say to them?
I mean, for most of the players in that situation, it's a superstition.
Okay.
And it's not based on anything more than I think it will bring me good luck. And that's why they do it. I don't have a problem with it. If a player feels strongly that they want a particular number at the end of the dollars, or whether it's 8.7 or the 93 or a 29 or a 67, if it's something that means something to the player, and usually it's by way of superstition, that's fine.
You're cool with it. Okay. You don't have
tell Steve to calm down. Tell him I said he should calm down.
Well, I'll try. I'm going to try. I'm going to run this clip for him tomorrow too. And lastly, we got a question for Big Dan. Now, Big Dan's been waiting like 3 months for this, and that's my fault because Big Dan DM'd me right before our last episode in June, Allan, for season 3. And I was going to get to it, and we just never got there. And then I forgot to kick off the season with it. So Big Dan wants to know this. He said, "Hey, Adam, big fan of SDPN and eternally grateful for the contributions that you, Steve, and Jesse have made to the hockey world." I'm going to ignore this part. Thank you, Dan, but we don't need to get into that. He said, "I'm attending law school this September at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University, and was largely inspired to do so by Agent Provocateur. Your conversations with Allan and friends have not only shown me the sorts of cool careers that lawyers can pursue that aren't directly necessarily tied to law, but also emphasize the notion that one can couple their career with their passion. So thank you for doing it." I was curious if, in a future episode of AP, you and Allan might be able to chat briefly about what the day in a life of a player agent looks like and what advice he'd offer someone looking to pursue a career in hockey ops or player representation. And Allan, we get this question a lot. And I just want to say this. I'm gonna preempt Dan's question with a caveat. I want what a day in the life of an agent is in mid-season, and then I want you're on vacation with your wife this past summer. So because there are big differences, I would say, right?
Oh, like I said before, you get into a certain routine of the season. Here's sort of a in-season routine. I happen to always be an early riser, and the people who know me, from players to general managers, a general manager will call me at 6:30 a.m. LA time.
Right.
And know that I'm up, because I generally get up between 5:15 a.m. I'm up and at 'em. There is East Coast time when the players generally hit the ice for practice or morning skate. And when they come off the ice is when I'm having a lot of communication with players at the NHL level. Mm-hmm. And then there's a West Coast time where guys hit the ice in the morning, and those guys are dark. And then when they come off the ice, there's another wave of messaging that goes back and forth, calls, whatever may be going on that day. Get into the afternoon. There's a window before it gets too late to communicate with Europe, but sometimes between like 9 p.m. European time to around 10:30, there is like checking in with a lot of different people who work with me, partner agencies in Europe, parents, maybe some kids who are shutting it down for the day between 9, 10 p.m. before they're done. You communicate with them. Then you have the 4 p.m. LA start to games on the East Coast.
Yep.
And I've got 4 screens going with 2 games on each screen, where I'm following those games, American League games, college games, junior games. Generally, when those games end, I go home. Mm-hmm. And I live now about a mile and a half office back to my home. Get home, grab a real quick dinner. It's just me and my wife and our dog. The kids are at university. And now I've got the Western games, mm-hmm. where I'm generally tuning in from, the 10-minute mark of the first period. And now I'm following all the West Coast games and American League West Coast games and Western Hockey League games and monitoring what's going on there. And then when those games end, all those players coming off the ice, I'm usually sending messages or receiving messages from those guys until I shut it down around midnight, and then do it all over again the next day.
Wow. I mean, LA time seems beneficial for that because, yes, you do have to wake up early, but at least you get to shut it down at midnight. I mean, it's a long day. It's a long day. And you're not a big sleeper anyway, right? You're kind of the kind of guy that just...
I sleep 4 or 5 hours a night. I've always been like that. I've slept 4 or 5 hours a night since I was since I was a teenager.
Wow. Yeah. And for guys, for most people, that's not possible. But Allan, you just, that is certain people. I have a member of my family. He's a 3-4 hour night. That's it. And he even went to the doctors like, is there anything wrong with me? And they're like, nope, just some people are like that. So thank you to that. Now let's talk summer. Let's talk, you're on vacation. You're looking at a beautiful monument in Italy or Greece. And you're with your 2 kids who are, not in university again, until, a few weeks from now. And what does your day look like as an agent on vacation?
So what I usually do, and what I've done for years and years and years, is once again get up really early in the morning when everybody's still sleeping, go out on a balcony or go outside in some way so I don't wake everybody up, and scroll through my text messages, look at my emails, return any calls that are urgent, and do an hour to 2 hours of work in the morning. And then if there's any ongoing urgent situations, I will let people know that I am only going to be available during certain windows of the day. And then I'm going to put my phone down and put it away. So I can generally check in every morning, keep updated with anything going on. August is usually when we go away on vacation, and it's usually a much slower time when many other people are on vacation as well. But there's always, something happening, a player unsigned, something going on, and you need to do some work. And I usually reserve it for the first hour or two, sipping some coffee while the rest of the family's sleeping.
I love it. So you're still working. You're working every day.
Oh yeah. I don't remember a day where I haven't done any work at all in 30 years.
30 years. Hey, congratulations on 30 years, Allan Walsh.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, what was the first NHL contract you got signed?
First contract I ever did was former Leafs assistant coach Dean Chenoweth when he played in the NHL. And it was with the Boston Bruins. And that was the first NHL deal that we negotiated.
How did that feel when that got done?
It was with Harry Sinden,
Oh.
legendary NHL GM, head coach of Team Canada 72. It was an interesting experience. You have to put the fact that you're dealing with a legendary person. I was 7 years old watching Paul Henderson score. And here I am many years later, negotiating a contract with the guy who was behind the bench. Yeah. So you just put that aside and do your job. I was way over prepared for a contract that got done pretty quick.
That's very cool. Very, very cool, Allan. Well, congratulations on 30 years. And, we're going to be back here in the next week or so doing another show here. So I won't belabor the point, but you know what? We're going to make year 30 and year 4 of your podcast game one to remember, my friend.
Our podcast. Yes.
Podcast. Yeah. So, Allan, have a great week and great weekend. And I'm looking forward to catching up again.
You got it. Always a pleasure. Bye, everybody.
This has been Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde. Follow Allan Walsh on Twitter @WalshA. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts by searching Agent Provocateur and hitting the subscribe button. YouTube.com/SDPN.